Yeah, do you want to start? So I give you 15 minutes for the whole thing?
Yes, thank you. That should be easily enough. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are almost at the end of the long but rather wonderful day. I am now going to try and summarise this brief novel I've written into 5 minutes worth of comments as a rapporteur. All right. So I think, there have been some really fantastic things that have come up today. I'm actually going to be writing the report, and I was just saying to Edwin that for the first time, I think we will actually include quotes because people were so succinct and just described things so well with such nuance and also such accuracy that we want to capture some of that from today. But generally, I've come up with a few key themes. I think the first one is that the effects of criminalisation are pervasive. So, our first session this morning, it was very clear that being involved in prosecutions as an accused or as a witness, it's traumatic, it's life-changing, and the consequences are long-term. From Marama, 25 years, and she's still working through, talking through her experience of that. But also clearly from today is the idea that criminalisation affects all people living with HIV. So possibly the fear of, prosecution, but also different speakers have mentioned different elements that don't always come up. Things like fear of something from the long forgotten past, things that could appear, whether an accurate explanation of what's occurred or not. Things of, partners who might have a vendetta or anger around an issue. And also, Justice Edwin Cameron talking about an extortion attempt. So I think one of the speakers also talked about this idea that many in the community have, that if it doesn't affect you in a very immediate way, then it's not a problem. But actually, it is a problem. It is a problem across marginalised communities for all people living with HIV, and really just for the general community. It's about injustice, and it's why we're here, damn it. Okay, second issue, the use of science. Paula, thank you, Paula. It was too slow. The Swiss statement was 1 million years ago. Why has it taken this long to really get an expert consensus statement and to really try and get modern science into courtrooms? So we think science has the potential to reduce prosecutions. That's exciting. I mean, for me, I think that's really exciting if half the prosecutions, 2/3 of the prosecutions that are happening now don't happen anymore. I would celebrate that. But at the same time, we have this very genuine fear that a reliance on science will just further marginalise and further stigmatise the same people. People will be blamed for not being on treatment or for not adhering to their treatment rigorously, or however the conversation goes. And that is something we are going to have to work very hard to get to address. And I loved Chris Byra's comment about governments actually, that's up to you. What are you doing? What are you doing that you haven't got treatment to people? Or what are you doing that you haven't created an environment where people feel safe to access treatment and to be able to take treatment, adhere to treatment in their own homes? Just finishing with science, we have, again, this issue that even with the expert consensus statement and whatever else we're doing to try and get accurate science into courts, it doesn't mean that courts are going to understand what's presented to them. Richard's reference to the Canadian court's hopeless reliance on the 80% condom use, completely misinterpreting the data, was a real reminder that just because we get it doesn't mean they're going to get it. And I'm rapporteuring on the morning, but I'm just going to sneak something in from the session we just had over there, which was the issue that Sarai said that in Malawi, one of the things that was really useful in the breastfeeding case was that the judge had previously been a nurse. So she came with some knowledge and some faith, some trust in medical and scientific information. Okay, third point. It's not always the letter of the law that's the problem, it's how it's used. Intent. These cases are often about a person doing something with intent, and in fact criminal law requires intent, and sometimes even the lawyers in the room say things about intent that I think, what are you talking about? These cases are not about intent. They're about someone's intention to have sex. They are not about someone's intention to transmit HIV. Yet the way that things are reported and the way that the laws are described with intent does so much harm in the media, because intention is, the general public thinks that the individual had an intention, but also just this ongoing problem that criminal law really doesn't fit with what's going on here. It requires intent, and these cases don't have intent. But also that the way the law is just routinely used on marginalised, resource poor communities. So whether it's sex workers, people from migrant backgrounds, black people. In California, their law that seemed like it was a very kind of generic law was, when they did research, they found it almost wholly used against sex workers. We know it's the way these laws are used that is just further targeting people that are already under surveillance by the legal system. Okay, fourth point. Dialogue is vital. And isn't it good that we're all here today dialoguing between ourselves, because that's how we come up with the ideas, the strategy, awareness of cases, what was done in that case, how that was won, how we get leverage in different situations. But also the dialogue amongst our communities, that it is essential to not just preach to the converted, that we go out and take the time, very hard to get funding for, but take the time to talk to people about why these are an issue. And again, the description of the work that was done in Malawi to stop Section 43 from coming through, actually sitting with women and talking about, but how will this actually affect you? Will it protect you? Because how will it affect you if it runs like this? And the women themselves coming up with the scenario that they did not like. Also, the intersection. So that's coming up more and more. I wasn't in the intersection group, but in the last 2 days I've been at meetings, and again today, for the first time, abortion keeps coming up as an intersecting issue, but also the criminalisation of same-sex sex and all those kind of sex works, the criminalisation of different communities and behaviours. Okay. Different arguments for different contexts. So we need to know our political environments. We need to know who to argue and how to argue. What is it that's going to get them to engage, empathise? Where do we hit them that it's going to make some sense? And I absolutely loved all the examples of grassroots advocacy, because we try really hard to be sophisticated, have really strong communication plans, and then a group of women in T-shirts singing no to Section 43. That is bloody genius. In 2018, I love that type of work is effective, and we shouldn't disregard it. And also strategic litigation. It's hard. The person who might be the lawyer's client, or the person who has to represent the issue, that is a big ask for that person, but strategic litigation can be very effective. And the last point I want to make around the morning is the issue of networks, expanding our networks. So it is really exciting that the network in this room has expanded since, we were in this room, not this room, but, in this room 2 years ago. We are expanding our networks. We're reaching out. We're learning more about Francophone Africa, Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And that's how we're finding the data. That's how we're finding what is actually going on out there. And rather frustratingly, the issue is bigger than it seemed 2 years ago and 4 years ago and 6 years ago when we originally started mapping this stuff. So I wanted to just say, to reiterate Laurel, it's all about justice. So whether we are framing it around the justice argument, the use of science, public health, however it is we frame it, it is about continuing to advocate about this issue that is very difficult for people to understand unless they have been involved in some dialogue around it, but it's still a fight that is fundamentally worth pursuing. So that's my very quick summary of this morning. I would now like to ask my board member, Paul Kidd, to please take to the stage and give a brief report on the legal strategies breakout session.
I've been told I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go very quickly. We had about 20 people in the session. It was a really diverse mix, people from all around the world. They were mostly lawyers. One person, George, wanted to put his hand up at the beginning just to see if it was all right if he could stay in the room, not being a lawyer. It was, of course, we welcome everyone. The our session was about litigation strategies, but it actually ended up being more about advocacy, about political advocacy and about strategic advocacy. Some key discussion points that came up was very much about the way those two things fit together, the way you fit advocacy and strategic litigation and lawyering and political action all into under the one umbrella, and how you make that stuff work. We talked about the impact of strategic litigation on plaintiffs and the difficulty of finding an appropriate plaintiff for a strategic litigation action, but also about the need to be alive to the fact that strategic litigation is very hard on plaintiffs, and in fact you might win the case, as Alan Malesh said, you might win your case, but your plaintiff will not necessarily be better off from it. We talked about the importance of support for legal action and advocacy and litigation that needs to come from the broader civil society, the need to have the awareness within community-based organisations, NGOs, civil society networks, etc., about what it is you're doing, why it's important, how they can support you. And again, as Alan said at one point, we need T-shirts. You know, we need people on the street. We need people to understand. We need people to paint placards. It's not just about having an argument in court. And also, I think one of the other themes that came up was the real need for greater coordination, interaction, networking between people working on these things, because people are working in their individual jurisdictions. They're working within their own legal framework. But one of the things we saw, particularly from Sally's presentation, in which she introduced us to the recently published HIV Justice Network case compendium that shows all of the known successful defence strategies that have been used around the world, that there is a lot that can be learned from other jurisdictions and applied in your own jurisdiction. A couple of key actions, just talking to my co-rapporteur Sophie at the end here, we felt like that aspect of the need to get better resources, money, advice for people doing this work could be supported by some kind of online service for lawyers working in the HIV space to help people just to reach out for assistance, to share knowledge and so forth. Whether that exists or not at the moment, we weren't too sure. And a greater connection with other social justice lawyering networks, which I think is one of the real themes out of today, the need to work with decriminalisation, with sex work, with drug user law reform, etc. And a new idea, I was asked to note down a new idea or something particularly useful. One of the speakers, whose name's gone out of my head at the moment, talked about the situation in California with the reform. It was Amela Rogers, it's written right here. Sorry? They worked on some HIV-related law reform, and they had some success, a few things that didn't work out, but mostly success. But she also noted the fact that they had made some policy improvements for sex workers as they went along. She talked about the fact that legislative reform included provision for people to have their convictions expunged, and that's something I think that we don't really talk about. If we're getting that law reform work done, we need to be also putting onto the menu the need that people who've been convicted under unjust law in the past should be able to have that conviction expunged. So broaden your focus and think about the other parts of the menu that need to go together with law reform. Thanks very much.
Okay, Now that we've finished the Australian block and you've all heard how English is meant to be spoken, I'll invite Sylvie up. Is English a second language, Sylvie, or third? Who will now speak to us in her second language, English, to tell us about the media breakout session. Thanks, Sylvie.
Okay, I will have to try to read my handwriting, which is not going to be easy. Our session was a very small and intimate session. There was about 5 of us in the room from the US, Canada, Australia, and France. And basically we thought about why does media work actually inaccurate, it's biased, it's sorry, I can't say that word. It's sensationalized stories. It reinforces prejudices and stigma, but most importantly, it's really devastating for lives. And what you have to remember is that when you're trying to work in the media, it's not just a topic. It's actually about people. So the first thing is to remember that media work must be governed by the do not harm principle. So you need to ensure that your action do not harm the person, are not going to affect the trial. And generally speaking, the advocates are going to need to reframe the narratives, and the narratives that you find in the paper is usually of the HIV monster, the fact that criminalisation is supposed to be there as a protective effect for women, for public health, that HIV is a death sentence, it's really easy to disclose, so you need to really reframe completely this narrative. And it's a really tricky work because the context is not always totally known. You don't know exactly what is going on in the trial. For example, there are legal considerations. It's often seen as a kind of a niche issue, so people are not necessarily interested in, reporting on it, even in the gay press or, places where you think that should actually be interesting. So what you need to do as key action is to usually try to have a media strategy in place. And that includes also social media, so not just contacting, newspaper or radio or whatever. So you need to find someone in your organization that can be the media person and become like the influencer. And you need to try to control the message and shift the discussion from what is often the individual framework to the bigger issue. The big picture sort of thing. But unfortunately, when there are really tricky cases, like some of the ones that have been in the media recently of deliberate transmission, which are really, really rare, it's going to be really difficult because people will be calling you and, it's not that easy to start talking about the big picture. So what you can say at that point is to try to reframe the conversation and say, well, this story should not really be about HIV, it really is about sexual assault, and try to sort of change the angle of the story. And then when you're trying to reframe stories, you have to try to appeal to the core values of your audience. So, for example, looking at a case in Canada, Canada is seen as a really fair, tolerant country, etc., etc. So try to shift that and say, well, look, this is really completely unfair. It's, it's racist, it's blah, 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 whatever you want. And it really would make, it makes the people suddenly realize that, we don't want to be portrayed this way. So you're applying to what is supposed to be their core values. You need to obviously keep to the fact. It needs to be backed by fact, but still, try to stay authentic and make it a message that is inclusive, where people can actually see themselves reflected. So, they could actually see themselves in that position. So it's not the other, but it becomes you, which is really powerful. When we looked at the questions to consider as we move forward, there was a point that U equal U does not equal the end of HIV criminalisation. And you don't want to create an underclass of people because they do not have access to treatment and are not, they don't have, I can't think of the word, they're not undetectable. Obviously, intersecting issues, HIV criminalisation and racism go hand in hand. And also remember that it's extremely stressful work, and asking people who are already marginalised to be people can be a burden, and you have to be very careful that the people who are coming to talk over and over, you know, in many events and speak on radio and things can end up feeling utilized, which obviously is not exactly great. So.
Sylvie's, I didn't say, for Sylvie's my co-worker at HIV Justice Network. And now, to make sure that we don't let anyone control the information outside the HIV Justice Network, I'd like to ask our board member Lisa to give the final report back on the intersectionalities breakout session.
Just so I can be sure. Oh. Getting old is fun.
Right. Our session was about building bridges, and it was extremely wide-ranging, and we talked very strongly about how much we wanted to build bridges. There were 30 to 35 people in the room, as well as the people on the platform. It was a full mix of people. And I think it's fair to say we wanted to build bridges with everybody, but we also wanted to have a jolly good complaint about the justice system, about feminist theory, and about funders. So we did. Briefly, the summary of some of the key issues, and it was very wide-ranging, so please forgive me if your issue doesn't come up here. There's a real willingness to and an interest in reaching across the silos, but we need to have the difficult conversations between us in the various silos about conflicting priorities and about ways in which things that we deem a priority in our silo may be contraindicated in another silo or may actually increase the stigma for somebody else. So it's about having some of those difficult conversations as well as looking for the areas that we can work together on. Clearly, funding came up, as it came up everywhere, and we need to support and educate funders to encourage them to support more work across our range of rights issues, and also to start thinking about how the funding they allocate could benefit multiple groups, not just the group that the funding is actually aimed at, but how can that work be extended to other groups? There are some funders who are already modelling good practice in this area, like Robert Carr, and we should really be lauding them and bigging them up and encouraging other funders to behave like them. We talked about the feminist fault line, the way in which earlier feminisms rush to use the criminal law to right injustices, and they are injustices, is understandable because the law is a powerful remedy and it's a very swift remedy, but actually it's one that we now realise has caused many further harms, and we need to ensure that that is better understood, and that we need to explain to many people who call themselves feminists that protecting women often actually doesn't protect them at all and even rebounds on them. And that goes not just for women but also for other groups who people would like to protect because they see them as in need of protection. You need to make sure that the protection is not actually causing greater harm. And the fourth key issue was that the justice system isn't. And I think you all know what I mean by that. So key actions, obviously, given the workshop, a key action is to actually make the effort to reach out to other rights campaigns out of our own comfortable area of knowledge, actually start talking to other people about what work we can do together. That is clearly starting to happen here with the discussions about abortion, sexual and reproductive rights, a whole load of other things. But it's important to do that reaching out and to have the difficult conversations that I talked about in the key issues. It's important for us to talk to our funders, the funders that we already have and the ones that we don't, of the needs for this work, and actually to put it into our bids. Maybe some of them will take it back out of the bid, but put it in there, tell them it's needed, show the evidence. We also feel that it would be really useful to get involved with Amnesty's cross-cutting work on SRHR and criminalisation, because they do have existing work that cuts across a number of these areas and which we could all get some ideas from. And we also want everybody to start trying to challenge that feminist fault line, to actually say, we know you're trying to help, think about how you're doing it, and think about the collateral damage that you may be causing with the help that you think you're giving us. And in terms of a new idea, I'm afraid I'm going to give a shameless advert for the Amnesty book, which is Using Human Rights to Challenge Criminalisation of Sexuality and Reproduction. And if you want one of these flyers, which tells you how to buy it, I think Jamie is still here and she's got some more flyers over there, and it's highly recommended. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. How's everyone doing? Yeah, so I always need you. It's my twin star, y'all. This is the Naina and Lynette show. Hi, everyone. So we don't have a whole lot of time left. We know there are lots of juicy things you're ready to get into this evening. We are too. But we wanted to take a little bit of time to hear from you what you think we can do. Like, basically, the conference hasn't even started yet. Right? So we just had this incredibly powerful day. We had some transformative conversations. What are we going to do to bring these conversations into the space while we're here in Amsterdam? So love to hear folks' ideas. Any thoughts? Yes.
Let me do that, actually.
Oh, no. You stay up here. You moderate. I got it.
Thank you. My name's Matthew Weir. I'm here reporting for AIDS Map on today's event, and as somebody who's been interested in this for a long time in this area. I think the most impressive thing has been the variety of voices and autobiographical experience and the non-silencing of people who have actually got something to say about their experience. The most powerful message is to allow original, authentic voices to speak in sessions about their experience and not to speak for other people's experience. And I think if we can keep that up in all of the sessions and allow people to, if you see somebody here who wants to speak, defer to their personal experience, because autobiographical personal experience is by far the most powerful way of communicating to people in power. Vulnerability, but also their power, and I think that's something which would be a really good thing to take away from today, because that's the thing I've been struck by.
Thank you so much. Yes, stories or data.
I'm Susanna. So one of the things that I think that we can take away is that in a number of sessions, certainly in the one that we had about building bridges, but throughout the day, I've heard some really interesting, very concrete examples of how people are trying to work across areas. And so in my request is that in the report or whatever you write up from this, it would be really great to see those highlighted, so that for those of us who want to keep doing that, we can turn to turn to things that have worked and try to learn from them and learn from the people who did that.
Okay.
This is also a shameless ad. So we will later in the year be doing HIV Justice 3. Advancing, I don't even know what I said. Advancing HIV Justice 3, where we will also capture those stories and other specific examples of effective advocacy from around the place. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I've noticed that a lot of white people in these spaces are afraid to call out racism and colonialism and talk around the subject. So you can just say it's racism and colonialism that are causing a lot of these problems. Word.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, here we go. Hi, I was really impressed and inspired by the conversation around privilege and U equals U in science today. I think it's really important. I just wanted to say that I am an HIV activist who is also a U equals U activist, who's also a HIV criminalisation activist, who's also a sex worker activist and a drug user activist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that particularly this week and particularly at this conference, it's a really valuable opportunity to find a bridge and a way for those in the U equals U space and those in the HIV criminalisation space to create pathways of change together. I think it's absolutely a question of privilege and access around the world, but we're also seeing people in areas that do not have treatment access are learning this information and it's inspiring them to push for change at country level. So I think continuing that conversation this week would be really valuable. And calling it out in sessions that are U equals U focused, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Hi, from the Scottish perspective, we're very interested in the relationship between the criminal justice system, the police, and the medical system as well, because they all have different roles when it comes to criminal justice. And so one thing for me that I've been noticing a lot is when we're hearing biomedical responses to HIV and they're talking about case studies, and you can kind of hear where it can become a criminal problem, and you're not hearing peer solution, you're not hearing solutions such as getting this patient who wasn't complying and etc. to talk to a peer or to have some kind of response instead of it. I've actually seen presentations at conferences like this where they then say, so we were forced to report to the police and we weren't sure how to do that. So looking out for those early signs of where things might need a peer-based support. So that's one thing. The other thing is, how do we work also with the police and the medical system to get them better understanding the stresses that we've all been dealing with here?
Thanks. I just wonder if there's a way to get in the back door, because I think that when we get together at a conference like this, we're all agreeing that this is a really bad idea, what's been going on around criminalization. But if we can get art and theater and dance into the public domain, I think it's been used a lot in places that are resource poor, like Africa, to get messages across. Why not use it everywhere?
Okay, are we good? Satisfied? All right, no, thank you very much for those contributions. We definitely will, I think, take them forth, record them in the report, and challenge ourselves going forward. I mean, if we're lucky enough and privileged enough, we should be coming back, in another year to discuss advances. And I'd like to challenge all of us to actually bring somebody else who doesn't agree, because that's one thing we don't do. We come here and we talk to each other, because we're all friends, we know each other, but we really need to start branching out and really starting to do that conversion work. Or, I mean, it may not be conversion work. You might find that we're the crazy ones. But hey, let's go out there and challenge ourselves to say 5 people. And this is part of our homework to us, right, to ourselves. We need to go out for the rest of this year and find 5 people to talk to about this who aren't on our side or who don't believe that this is the right way to go. Because as you know, initially when you speak to any Jack or Joe on the street about criminalization, their first response is, yes, it's a good thing. So we need to start there, and we need to start doing that conversion work, because I think that's one of the easiest ways that is really cost-free that we can start building our movement. Secondly, we need to try and find funding to bring that person that we've converted to the next Beyond Blame. That is your challenge. If, of course, it's not going to be in the US. Which will not be in the US. Yes, it won't be in the US. If it's in the US, we're not going. If it's in the US, we're not going. I think that is a challenge that I'd like to pose to all of us. Secondly, there are a few other interesting sessions that have been noted in the piece of paper that you received with your program today. I'd like us all to please try and attend all of those during the week, engage around the topic matter, and do the intersectionality at this conference, right? It hasn't started. It's a big opportunity. I think there's like 150,000 of us here. I don't know how many. Many. 15,000, not 150, okay. I'm very bad at math. I suck at math. I do apologize. 15,000 of us at this conference, so let us go and actually make the circle bigger, and we can do that work right here.
Yeah, that's so great, Lynette. Thank you. You know, many of our targets, like we like to talk about our advocacy targets, our policymaker, you know, healthcare provider targets. A lot of our targets are at the RAI. Let's go talk to them, right? We need to be talking to these folks. So actually, tomorrow morning, we have a great opportunity. There are two people who are going to be on the morning plenary, two very special people, Robert Suttle and Alan, I'm sorry, what is Alan's? Maleche, are both going to be on the opening session tomorrow morning. How many folks are planning to be there to support? Okay, great. It would be wonderful to have a strong showing of support. We have fought really hard to get HIV criminalization into the main conference agenda. This is the first year that HIV criminalization is having such a major presence in the main conference agenda after being sort of like siloed out year after year after year, even though it's been a crisis that's been affecting our communities for a long time. So we want to show a lot of love and support, and we may also want to hold some folks accountable around that too, right? So if people are interested in discussing actions to increase visibility around these intersecting criminalization issues, there's a lot of stuff already in the works. Sex workers are organizing around FOSTA, SESTA, and a number of other things. People are organizing around rights of people who use drugs. There is also the opportunity to organize around HIV criminalization. And so, Edwin, did you want to invite folks to meet at a certain time, if they're interested?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is fantastic that we're on the agenda tomorrow, and one of my concerns is that there's so many things that I'm now so on the agenda. I don't know if I can actually organise the advocacy as well for tomorrow morning. That would be my concern. But the best thing you can do is go wear one of these T-shirts, of course, which you've all got. I mean, if you have, you're going to the Human Rights Networking Zone launch right after this. I believe there's all kinds of the sign-making things going on in the Human Rights Networking Zone. No, there isn't. Okay. Well, there are. Where are people making signs? And yes, of course, Richard can say.
It's a party up here.
And I'm crashing. So I just wanted to say about the Human Rights Networking Zone, since it's come up, of course, you're all cordially invited to join us at the welcoming reception between 5 and 6:30 before you go to the conference opening. But during the week, we're trying to use the zone to shine a spotlight on HIV criminalization in various ways. And that includes a photo stand where there are, you can put yourself in the picture as an advocate against HIV criminalization, post it on social media with hashtags and so on, and just raise the visibility that way of HIV criminalization issues, including steering people to the HIV Justice Worldwide website where they can find out more. So stop by when you're in the zone and take your picture and share it widely. That's one thing you can do. But there are no sign-making materials as far as I know.
That's excellent. Great. So our task, right, is to go out there and elevate the discourse around HIV criminalization at all these intersections that we've been talking about today, right? So that's what we're here to do. We're going to be doing that over the next several days, find each other, love on each other, figure out how we're going to decriminalize this world together. And I guess one of the things I want to say is I just really appreciate Edwin. While he's up here, can we just appreciate Edwin Bernard, who has galvanized so much of this movement and so many of us and really brought us together. HIV Justice Worldwide is because of you and your leadership and your work. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to thank Naina and Lynette and Richard, and well, if I start listing everybody in HIV Justice Worldwide, but really, all I did was start a blog, and then that kind of something happened with that, and the people wanted to join in, and now we've got this movement, and there is so much that can be done. Also wanted to there's another campaign, Chase the Virus, Not the People, a fantastic ECA-focused campaign. They're going around with amazing T-shirts and plastic handcuffs, and rather than us have our own campaigns, we just need to join in with. Obviously we can wear our T-shirts, but there's going to be, we have to raise the voice of everybody who's marginalized and criminalized, and and we have to move beyond our silos. I so appreciate that you've all stayed, that you've all come. I need to thank, in particular, the HIV Justice Network team, who have been, and the board, who also we press ganged into doing some work for us as rapporteurs. Of course, everybody as part of HIV Justice Worldwide, who came, who presented, who you've given us amazing ideas. Obviously, our funder, the Robert Khan Network Fund, without whom none of this would be possible. And I guess last but not least, Nick, for just making this all run so smoothly and for being my rock. One last thing, so it's very easy now. Are you able? There's no map, but on the program, it's very to get back to the conference center. It's really easy. There's information on the program how to do that, and I've also been asked to remind you about No Pants No Problem on Thursday, which I believe Nick is DJing at. Is that right? And one of the beneficiaries is the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, and the Global Network of Sex Work Projects. I'm keeping my pants on for now, but between now and then, there's an awful lot more work to be done, a lot more people to be held accountable, a lot more voices to be raised. So let's go and do that. And thank you very much.